So we are here with Edo Baraf from Pencil First Games.
Hello.
Welcome. So we're
Thank
going to be
you.
talking a little bit about replayability and what you look for in a game, because you're in the game producing side of things. So what do you look for when you're choosing a game and kind of moving forward through the production?
Sure. Replayability is super important. I think a baseline to start with is wanting to play again, right? Like I think you can get stuck in replayability and miss out on like, do I ever want to play this game again? So for sure, something I always am looking for in a game that I'm playing or designing or reviewing or picking from a designer is a game that you play it and you want to play it again. Sometimes longer games, you don't necessarily want to instantly play it again, but a game that you play and you think about and you're like, hey, I'd like to play that game again. That's sort of step one. And if it's not a game you want to play again, then you probably aren't going to publish it. You're never gonna play it again. And then in terms of replayability, right? Pencil First Games has games at a variety of different weights. We're probably going to talk a lot about the 100 Torii, which is sort of in the middle, if not slightly up, at least for Pencil First Games. But then you have a game like Herbaceous or Sunset of Water, which are really light. So when you're thinking about replayability between you sort of take into account the weight of the game. So on a really light game, it's really often about just it was a fun experience. I enjoyed it. I felt like I had compelling and dynamic choices, and those sort of change per game. Whereas in a heavier game, something a little bit more like in the medium category, like the 100 Torii, you want to have that sense of I want to play again and try different strategies or take different approaches, or I think if I can go that way or this way, it's going to be interesting. Or what if I had done that? What if I had done this? That can be true in a game like Herbaceous, but it's not as you don't feel it in the same way as sort of a medium game. And that kind of ability to have strategic approach to what you're going to do and think that if I had done it differently or veered one way or the other, I would have had a different outcome. Maybe I could have won. That kind of feeling, I think, is something you're trying to bring out.
Absolutely. I mean, for us, the strategy aspect is huge because when you play a game, and let's be honest, I'm not always successful. He normally is the successful one in our games. You want to jump back in and try that different strategy. Even if it has let's go with worse outcome, it's fun to have different paths and different strategies and decisions to make. But you're right. On a lighter weight game, sometimes you don't want to have to think too hard. You just want the variety in even just the pieces and the like Sunset Under Over Water. I love the variety of the pictures.
Right.
It's a nice fun game to play when you get it to the table. Whereas the 100 Torii it's a puzzle.
Yeah.
Like it's
Yeah.
truly a puzzle as you go. And I don't know, for us, the longer you play, or sorry, the more times you play, the longer the game gets because you want to try
Yeah.
something new
You
or
can
find a
see.
new path.
Yeah, for sure, for sure. I think one of the nice things about the 100 Torii and designed by Scott Caputo is because of the different ways you can score and the different player powers. For people who aren't familiar with the game, actually, just this, essentially it's a tile laying game where you are laying out this Japanese garden, and there are like landmarks on the table on the different tiles, and you're trying to connect landmarks. But the more gates or Torii they go through, the more they're worth. And so you're building up points by connecting, and you can use those to gain more victory points or to get special people to help you, and they do have different abilities. And the more you use a helper, the more points they're worth, sort of that kind of thing. But so what's really works really well in the 100 Torii is one, by using different guests, by sort of taking different approaches, you can play differently and have a different strategy, or say, I'm going to go for all of one type of landmark, or I'm going to diversify. You can have sort of different approaches, and that's the strategy side. But then just on the tactical side, because the board is this emerging space that's sort of stretching out as different people are playing tiles, it's creating its own uniqueness every time you play. Like I don't think we ever tested it, and it certainly wasn't a slogan, but like I don't think you're never going to have the same Torii board at the end anytime you've played, right? Like sometimes it goes off in one direction, sometimes it splits in two, sometimes it's more organic. I mean, the behavior of all the players is what's driving that board and driving that decision. One of the other really fun things from the 100 Torii in that category is, since you're making these longer and longer lines, you essentially are like playing off of previous players' actions, and then at some point some player can sort of like take out the final value of a line and sort of get like, I got the 8 points and you can't get any better, and then it sort of dies on the vine, for lack of a better term. It sort of like becomes less appealing, and then suddenly people work off in another direction. So it's got a real sense of life to how the garden and the environment tiling grows, but then also that approach where you can sort of be like, I'm going to really go for using the geisha, which means I'm going to use extra tiles, or I'm going to try to use the poet and block landmarks. And so it's got a lot of interesting choices in that regard too.
Yeah, that's one thing we find. I think from the first couple of games, we were laying down tiles and we're in a strategic. The more times we've played it, I think we get like we know the game better, so we're getting better at it, and it's changing how we're playing it. So we're finding increased replayability from just how much better we're getting at the game and what we can do with it.
Yeah, I think I think Scott did an incredible job. It can get a little thinky. It can slow down a little bit. That's real. It's got a lot of pieces, but that sort of depth of understanding how to create value and see value, and then starting to think about what other players are doing. You can sort of just play the first time and still have a good time, right? And make points and score, and the points are pretty together. But as you get better, you just see those opportunities for those combos and those plays. It also is an interesting game, sort of like Herbaceous, where in Herbaceous, you can't really have the same strategy because it's very dependent on how other players are playing. So one of the things that makes playing Herbaceous have a really high replayability is like it's a push your luck game. For those who don't know Herbaceous, it's a second collection push your luck game. But when you're playing, if you were somebody who was really aggressive the first game and you're collecting the cards really quickly, and other people feel like they were missing out, in the next game they might react and become more aggressive, which would change. It changes the table dynamic. So like just how the players remember playing with you in Herbaceous starts impacting how they play. And even though it's a light game, it creates a lot of replayability there because of the dynamics of the group.
From a playability standpoint, I think like 100 Torii and every pencil first game that we've looked at is the rule books are spectacular.
Oh, thank you.
They lay out everything, and you can go in, you can learn right away. And then also, if you just need to come back, get a refresher, I'm going to assume it's going to be very easy to get that. From a development standpoint, exactly how would you go about doing that?
Well, it's a great question. So I think you need to value it. Like from Pencil First perspective, I'm often involved in design and development, but like in terms of the person responsible for the overall product you get when you get a Pencil First Games, it's me. And I fundamentally believe in the entire experience, the opening the box, getting to your stuff, learning how to play. I think if any of that sort of falls short, the experience falls short. When it comes to a rule book, generally the process starts with the designer is working on the game. There's play testing. It's pretty loose. And then you're like, hey, let's write this all down, right? And you have a basic write-up. And each designer, Steve Finn likes to do it one way, Keith Mateka another, Scott Caputo another. But usually I get that rule book in whatever Word doc form they do.
Yeah.
And then so I have a general template that I've been using, which really came from, games like Ticket to Ride, Small World. Is it
Okay.
games? Days of Wonder have really nice rule books. Like I basically looked at companies that had really nice rule books and said, oh, okay, well, they give this overview, they do this, they like have good sections, and you like get used to that. And so I move everything into a document, and I like every game we've done, and we've done a lot of them, I like pull up like one that's about the same weight and size, and I'll just like remove all the words and try to keep the same headers, and then start laying it out and get to that point where you have this really clear Google Doc, Word doc version of it. You then are starting to work on how to diagram and add those images and build it out. Again, to that original point, I don't care how long the rule book is as far as like there isn't a set in my like, oh, I don't want to pay for 16 pages. I only want to pay for 12. Or I only don't want to pay for 12 pages. Like, I want the best rule book. And like, if it means paying 10 cents more to have an extra 2 pages, like, let's just have the extra 2 pages. Torii was sort of a different thing with the whole section about Japanese culture, and that was even another piece to it. But you just make sure the diagramming is great. I think for people who struggle with rule books, what I try to tell them is like, take pictures of your game. Just take your prototype, put it out. Take a photograph, put it in the Word with your camera, and like, because people struggle with graphic design and other things to explain. But when it's like, no, just set it up the way you want it, and then just take a photo of it and put the photo in the rule book. That'll help you. It'll help your play testers, and it'll help your graphic designer. I also, obviously, play testing is really important. Play testing on your own. Playtesting with blind playtesting, getting feedback from people who learned how to play from a rule book as opposed to you teaching them. I think that's a step some people skip, which they shouldn't. I think all of those go a long way. I find rule books are like essays from high school or college, where they just get better the more times you read them over and deal with them and update them and read them over. You just let time pass, go back. Oh, that doesn't make sense. Read them out loud. Try to read them as if you're an original player. Some good tips are like, I've come to appreciate, if you have a lot of terminology in your game, doing a lexicon or a terminology pass before the rule book is great. Hey, we're going to capitalize all these lines. We're going to do this. We're going to do that. Actually, unfortunately, the 100 Torii has a couple of inconsistencies. It's a very nice rule book, but we're working on the expansion, and you're going through and you're trying to get it right. And you're like, well, did we capitalize this in the original rule book? And you're like, well, we did on page 8, but on page 12 we didn't, right? And you're like, oh man. The amazing thing about the 100 Torii from a rule graphic design perspective is Vincent Dutrait, right? The illustrator who did the cover.
Yes.
Also did all of the graphic design and the entire rule book. There is no other, typically, especially when you have an illustrator at his caliber, right? Like top of, like literally the top. Right. He doesn't do graphic design. He's an illustrator. He but Vincent is this jack of all trades. And so everything in that book, all the layout, all the every single image, every single element, he did. Now we worked together. I laid it out. We discussed it. But he did it, and he's exceptional. So like the amount of times Vincent, just knowing how to put the arrow in, knowing how to put the things from the side. There's a lot of like subtleties in that rule book that you only get from somebody who's probably made 50 rule books. So he did a really nice job on that.
Yeah, and I mean, the other aspect from like replayability in your games that I really enjoy are all the kind of your reference cards, or I mean, for the 100 Torii, this little guide that you put in 4 different languages. It's that attention to detail that makes it so easy to get back to the table. You don't need to pull out the rulebook. Yes, the rulebook has some amazing Japanese history that we quite enjoyed. It has all the information. But if you just want to get this game back to the table after 3 or 4 months, the tools that you've given in all of your games give you the ability to just pop that game back out and get it to the table and start playing, rather than having to do a deep rule dive before playing, which I think from a replayability standpoint, if you can take it off the shelf, throw it on the table, and teach it to a new player really quickly, that's kind of an essential for us.
Yeah, I think that, and thank you for saying that. There's some interesting little nuances that are small things that you get better at. So you'll notice, if I'm not mistaken, but on that bottom of that rule card you have at the very bottom, it should say like player count with the tiles you remove, right?
Yeah.
That's something that wasn't there originally, and was just like we would be playing or play testing, and it's a little rule that you like really like. You almost, in most games, you got to go to the rule book for that. You're like, I don't remember how many tiles to remove for 6 players. Or for whatever 4 players, and it just got sick of like, why do I have to pull the rule book out for that? Let's put it there.
We just finished talking with Edo about the 100 Torii. We will also be having a second video on designer principles and pencil first games.